Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jonno White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jonno White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Travis Moore, Dr. Travis Moore, and Travis is the administrator at Carbon County School District 1. I'm looking forward to chatting with Travis. I know we have a lot of educational leaders listening, but also for other leaders, I believe we can all learn something from leaders in other industries too. Travis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jonno.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our chat. First of all, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what you do?
Oh, you bet. I'm part of an administrative team here in my school district. My assignment is to be the lead administrator at an alternative high school. And in my free time, I'm also a county commissioner here in my county where I live.
Wow. And for those outside of, the US in particular, what does it look like? What's involved in being a county commissioner?
Well, county commissioners in Wyoming are kind of the in-between governmental entities for the state legislature and that level of decision making, and then the counties are an extension of that state arm for tax collection and things of that kind. And then you have municipal governments, that run the cities and such.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for unpacking that. So let's hear a bit of your story. As you look back, even as far back as childhood, what are some of those moments, particularly, I guess, as we start in your early years, that you remember that really shaped you to become the person and the leader you are today?
One of the earliest things I can remember watching sports here. I always wanted to be a team captain of some kind. I was always interested in student council as I came through school, not really understanding the whole of what leadership meant at the time, but I enjoyed meeting with other people from around the state with the various summer camps and activities that they had for young leaders. But I would guess the first time that it really dawned on me that I could be a leader and have some kind of impact in the world was when I was employed with the federal government here as a wildland firefighter while I was going to college. And in that type of stressful environment and that kind of thing, leadership really took a physical form of what that needed to be, how to take care of people, how to watch out for their safety, following plans, understanding where you fit in a larger system to really fulfill your part of things. But that's where it really dawned on me what it was. Before that, I was lucky enough to follow the track through student government and things of that kind to see from the outside what it meant. And I knew different people that held different positions in my town and in the state. But I didn't really understand what it means until I started working for the federal government. And then I understood,
Yeah.
where one person could really make a difference in a position like that.
And as you learned that, I love that lesson, the significance and the difference that one person can make. Are there any stories that come to mind where you felt like you saw that impact yourself, or you saw other leaders individually make a difference that caught your attention?
Oh, you bet. Early on, I had some hard lessons to learn. Wanting to be fair and firm and those types of things. So I was kind of hard and rough around the edges, kind of a brusque young leader, earning my chops. But the biggest lesson on that part is that if you're doing it that way, you might be leading just yourself, because people don't want to put up with that nonsense. I learned then through some hard lessons that taking care of the people is more important than being cool as the leader. So in that environment, making sure we took care of all the first aid injuries. As you would imagine, there's quite a few in wildland firefighting, but making sure that people knew that I cared, that, hey, do you have blisters on your feet? Do you have enough water? Do you have snacks in your pack? And making sure people had the creature comforts on that part, made the job so much easier for them and for me. When I kind of figured out, hey, that's my job, is to make sure that these people are taken care of so that they can do the job that we're assigned to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you've made a point about caring for people and how that's more important than the personal sort of, as you said, I know that rings true for me when I was younger, not worrying about how much I'm liked or how cool I am as a leader, but actually learning that it's about caring for my people. That's a great lesson that that any leader could I guess take away.
You bet. As they would say in classical literature, Everybody wants to wear the crown until they feel how heavy it is.
Yeah, it's so true. So in more recent years, do you have any favorite stories of mentors that you've watched, or your own stories where you've seen, great breakthroughs?
Oh, you bet, Jonno. Early in my graduate studies, I remember having a lesson on Glasser in undergraduate, and I did a report on it with a team of people, to move into the educational field. And it's come full circle because we're chasing that same kind of philosophy of building relationships and helping people meet their wants and needs in the school setting. So that big circle, I didn't have any idea what all it included at the time as an undergraduate, but now to see some of the fruits of what that is, building those relationships and tying into a positive culture, meeting people where they are and helping them figure out what they need and how to get what they need, has been really big. And I'm a collector of stories in that way. But it's just the same for a teacher. It doesn't matter how much I care about the content and that kind of stuff, unless the people know that I care about them first, and building that relationship and seeing successes through what they do and valuing, the experiences and the stories that they bring into it, because God knows there's a great deal of learning that happens outside of school, which is equally important, that should be tied into the lessons in the classroom.
Yeah, that's absolutely, Travis. I agree. As on your journey, are there any mentors or any leaders that you've particularly enjoyed, or they've just had a really big influence on you because you've watched how they've led?
Well, I'm a big fan of the classics, so I could list a bunch of different leaders in that way. But as a collector, one of my mentor teachers when I first started teaching was part of the job interview and was a little brusque with me about getting into education, thinking of me leading a classroom, much less leading a school at that point in time. And it really had me thinking about my priorities and doing the things. And it was a very valuable mentorship piece because it wasn't done for me to reconsider the profession or to be hard on me as a new person, but to really think about what my role is and the gravity of what that role could be. Not a lot of people think about how much power and influence a teacher could have doing what they do day in and day out. But it comes down, it flavors the pitch of everything that you're teaching, and putting it into places where you're meeting the folks where they are. Being the smartest person in the room is not the thing that you want if that's what you're out to establish. So I learned very early that I had just as much to learn about my students as they did for the content for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all learn from the people that we're leading. And any favorite stories from you as a teacher and as a leader in terms of why you do what you do? What really gets you out of bed in the morning? Any stories about students and the community and that really for some reason have stuck out to you?
Oh, you bet. I'll give you a question. Just one example. Not even knowing that you have the impact that you have. There's a lot of those kind of stories, but one lesson that I learned very early on, being an academic type of person myself, is figuring out what really fits, to do things and getting information from a young person to say, well, Dr. Moore, I'm really interested in automobiles. Is there anything that I can work on in science class that has to do with automobiles? Well, of course there are. And we're on that learning journey together. I had this discussion years ago, and I had it again yesterday with a young person to tie in the content so they could see the importance of what they were learning, and really made a difference in their studies and that kind of stuff. Because at that point, that young person thought and believed that education was something they had to put up with and was being done to them, as opposed to an opportunity to enhance their life and to move into bigger and better things themselves. They saw it as a rite of passage and not, the curve of learning that would hopefully last their life.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. That's really interesting. And I definitely have have learnt that, and I've learnt to value education. I used to see it as a rite of passage, like you've explained, but now I've learnt it's just the significance. And you know what, for leadership, even for leadership, one thing that's in common with great leaders that I've experienced is that they are lifelong learners, truly curious, open-minded, searching for new information, breaking down echo chambers. It's something that is definitely apparent in great leaders.
Well, I completely agree. That's the ticket. And the best way for me to do that is to listen more than anything, to understand, who it is I get to appreciate the company of at any given time.
Yeah, that's so good, Travis, and wonderful to hear a bit of your story. I think we're going to have some really interesting answers to our Leadership Express questions as well. So I want to spend a bit of time in here. Are you ready?
You bet.
Okay, the first thing is, what's a book that you've gifted to other people?
Awareness by Anthony DeMello.
Oh, I haven't had that recommendation. What's I mean, obviously it's about awareness, but can you give a quick overview? Because that sounds like a really interesting one. Thank you.
It's an interesting text, but it gets into some of the clarity of life, the synchronicity of things when you're working at a high level, but it attacks seemingly sacred things in theology and some of that stuff, written by a Catholic priest whose life was spent training other priests, but he took it upon himself to couple together a lot of wisdom from all over the world to say, hey, we're really looking at the same thing, just different ways, which was fantastic for me to read. And I share that with lots of people that I come in contact with, that's the spiritual piece is really important to him. But that's one that I do give away quite a bit. And I like his wit, because he's really funny.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Thank you. What about right now? Are there any books you're reading, any podcasts that you're enjoying listening to, any blogs that you're reading, or journals? Like, what are you really enjoying reading or watching or listening to at the moment?
Well, I try to keep up on the Marginellian, and the book that I'm reading professionally right now is I Cannot Get Enough of William Glasser. As an educational environment and the formatting for relationships and things of that kind, we're really excited about that. So we've been digging into that wholeheartedly, taking some training, reading several texts of his, but it's just no nonsense things. And just why I haven't been doing things this way for so long is beyond me. But again, some of those valuable texts and lessons kind of happen where you are when you're ready.
Yeah, that's right. It's so true. So what was his name again?
William Glasser.
William Glasser. Thank you. Yeah, I know there are so many educational leaders, so that's going to be fantastic. There's going to be a lot of people scribbling a note, Googling his name. So thank you for that. Here's another one. When you are sitting in a one-on-one with one of your people that you're leading, or you're leading a meeting with your team, are there, or even when you're sitting with a parent, are there any questions that are Travis's sort of go-to questions that you find yourself asking a lot in different settings as great questions to unearth something?
Well, no matter what happens, I always have to know what the people are after in their lives, and where our paths cross, what they want out of that experience. Because then we can examine systems, we can put together planning and metrics and things, for people to really get to that place at a high level in the time frame that they want to accomplish those types of things. But it all comes down to, what do they value in life? How does that person operate? What's important to them? What do they want out of different situations?
Yeah, I like that. That's a good thought. What about what's a commonly held belief that in education that you passionately disagree with?
Well, that public education as it is, that the structure works for everyone. that, hey, you go to school, K-12, you get your high school diploma, you're ready for college, and that's the answer to all the world's problems. Where, in the United States and in the state of Wyoming, I think we undervalued vocational training for a good long time.
Yeah.
I think we have undervalued social and emotional learning for a good long time. And I think we're seeing the impacts of that undervaluing in our economy and in our behavior in our communities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I tend to agree. What do you think? What are you seeing as some of the answers to that? Like, what are you seeing that's been a big breakthrough in how to make education work for everyone, not just for those who are wired to really thrive in a traditional environment you just mentioned and process?
Yeah, I've said many times in front of the school board and other educational professionals and leaders that my students are more than test scores. And the big piece for me is that education and learning per se is a very personal thing. And every individual should have kind of a personalized track through this stuff to hit those basic skills, but to build on things that they're already interested in. And the way we have the system set up doesn't allow that. So it's contrary to what we know about the brain. It's contrary to what we know about psychology. And we just keep using the same system to try to do those things. And it just isn't that. I'm a big fan of personalized education.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think, and it's interesting for me because elements of education really suited me, and I watched, but I definitely had some friends where I felt like the way our educational system here in Australia, which is very similar, to the US and, in that more traditional sort of way that we've done it previously. But I just saw one friend comes to mind in particular who just absolutely struggled, never fit in the box at school. And as a result, like someone like me, you would have looked on at them and thought, oh, well, they mustn't be very smart. Like that might have been your assumption. And then this happens again and again and again, right? And then out of school, really found a love for a trade and was then starting to study in that area. Fast forward a decade, and is an incredible leader in construction. But one of the things that, and I never thought they weren't smart, but I'm saying you could have looked at that and assumed that. But I'm just amazed at how wise and brilliant, truly brilliant they are in the construction space, because they've found, and they sort of found their sort of groove, but they could never find it in the education system. And that always stuck with me. I just watched them and thought, what is it about our education system for someone so brilliant, such a wonderful person, that just didn't fit them? That's just one example, but yeah, that's always been a personal story where I've watched on and thought there must be something else, because that person is wonderful and brilliant and fantastic, and they were a great example of how they just completely did not fit with the sort of cookie cutter education approach.
Exactly.
So here's another question for you, Travis. What's a recent leadership lesson you've learned for the first time or been reminded of?
Well, that's a good one. One of the big pieces that I see in some of the social and other reforms that, in my role as a county commissioner, that has come back and paid dividends over and over is, and I'm hoping I'm getting better at it, but, listening to folks to see what they really want, and then giving them the option to say, well, if you created the system, to honor your profession or your trade or whichever piece of the government they fit into, what would that look like, to make things more efficient, to make things better for the public, because that's what we're there for, is to serve the public. And the responses I get are fascinating.
What, any responses in particular that come to mind that you've heard and thought, oh, that is a brilliant idea, even if there's no way yet to how we'd implement it, but anything that you've particularly loved hearing that you just thought was a brilliant concept?
Well, it wasn't necessarily for me discovering the brilliance, but helping others through discussion to see the brilliance of themselves and their ideas as professionals in the field, because I'm not a professional in that field. I'm the government guy that came to help and to try to solve a problem. One example comes to mind. We've been talking about consolidating emergency communications in our county. And I asked the professionals in that field, I said, well, what would happen if you guys designed your own center and you guys were in charge of it? You would make all the rules and all the things. And they looked at me like I had two heads, because they always work with specific departments, whether that's law enforcement or fire or emergency response. They never really saw themselves in the role as a communicating center, or as an equal seat at the table with all the chiefs of police and sheriffs and doctors and so on. And they should be. So watching them discover that idea, was wonderful.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. And it is one of my favorite things in really all the work that I do, is watching someone have an aha moment, their own aha moment. Actually, the coaching framework that I use in the clarity sessions that I do with leaders, the original sort of training around coach, and I don't have his name handy, but his framework is called the Coach Framework, COACH. It makes a lot of sense. But when I went to a training and someone explained it, the analogy, and I've never found a better analogy, but it's why I love coaching so much, and why I think everyone should be, everyone needs a coach, and every leader should be coaching their people. And I love helping even like schools create a coaching culture amongst their teachers and non-teaching staff. But the analogy is that, when we are the coach in a situation, or this is what I hear you describing in this situation you just said there, we need to be like the midwife when it comes to a revelation. Too often as coaches, as leaders, as facilitators, we're the ones having the revelation. And
Yes.
we want to tell everyone else how amazing the revelation is. But what I love about what you just said is that the best experiences for all of us happen when we're the one sitting across from a coach or across from a leader, and we have the revelation. So as a coach, it's about facilitating and helping the other person, have the baby. They need to be the one that has the revelation, and I need to be the one who's there to help, like a midwife. And I've never found a better analogy. Because it is funny comparing myself to a midwife, but it's so true, because if you can help that other person have that aha moment, and particularly about themselves, that's so memorable.
Right. And I equate that to teaching in the classroom, working with my staff, looking for new staff. I need to find the midwives of the world that take great pleasure in other people doing that work. Having that experience to say, well, it doesn't matter what I know, it matters what the students learn.
Yes.
I'm glad you're a content expert, but you need to be an expert in how to get the people to learn on their own, not just with us.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's the number one complaint I hear from leaders about consultants and coaches. And I've experienced it myself, even in, say, therapy, when you're with a counselor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It's when someone is more concerned with telling you the content than they are with helping you have the revelation and helping you walk away with something. And I love that you've made that parallel to the classroom, because yeah, you're right. It's 100% the same, isn't it? It's like, no matter how great you are at that content, no matter how much of an expert you are, the rubber hits the road when the people in your class go, and they have the penny drops for them. That's great education.
Yes, and that notion by itself completely changed my hiring practices in terms of recruiting and interviewing and that kind of thing. If I can find someone that's a midwife that comes in, to use your analogy, that loves kids and loves teaching, if I can find the midwife coming in, they can learn the content over time. I used to chase grade point averages and levels of expertise and content and say, well, we got the best and brightest people, coming in to teach these things, but they might not have had the social and emotional skill bank to pull from to relate their things so that they're the midwife helping the students to learn. So I used to look for experts, and now I look for midwives.
Oh, that's so good, Travis. I've never thought about it that way. I used to look for experts, and now I look for midwives. That's such a good. I might need to do a blog post about that, or a podcast on my other podcast about that, because I love that idea. I've never thought about it like that, but you're so right. That's brilliant when it comes to hiring. I completely agree.
I was inspired with the analogy that you gave me. It's something that I learned from my most current superintendent, the supervisor of our district. He did much the same thing over his career and advised, many of the administrative staff going into hiring season that, hey, you're better off hiring people that care than you are hiring experts. And by God, that's couldn't be more true.
Absolutely. I love that idea. Another question for you. Any movies or TV shows that really impacted you?
Oh my God. I love learning about the past. So docudramas and movies about history. I love just to see how other leaders worked on things and figuring out how small the world is. The little town where I live is called Rawlins. And it was founded by, at the time, General Rawlins, on his way through establishing many military forts, post-Civil War, that kind of stuff. But I did not realize, and it was through a documentary on President Grant of the United States, that person that my town's named after is one of the reasons Grant rejoined the Army and became who he became. And that
Wow.
just blew my mind. So I can't get enough reading about leaders from all over the world, experiences that they've had, and figuring out, hey, we're still having the same struggles, the same things. And it's fascinating to me how all these things are connected, that wisdom isn't just in one little place.
Absolutely. That's a great story. And it's I love that legacy is never as black and white as we make it. There's always that when you dig deeper, I think some of the best and the greatest legacies are those people. Actually, one of my favorite stories recently from another podcast guest was they talked about how there was a leader who's now passed away. I think it's a book called The Trillion Dollar Coach, or it's something like that. But it was this book. It has been written. I think the leader they're talking about has passed away. If they haven't, then I apologize. I'm just remembering this story off the top of my head. But they said that this book was written by all of the people that this coach coached, who went on to have and lead some of the world's $1 trillion companies. And you may never know. You wouldn't have known this coach's name. And yet some of the most well-known people in the world all have written this book with stories about the wisdom that they got from this coach. And I just loved that story because I was like, wow, how amazing is that? That's true leadership, to actually have an impact on that many people's lives under the radar. And yet when you dig a little bit deeper, you see that really their legacy is, well, that's why the name of the book is in trillions of dollars of
Right.
organizational greatness and people around the world in jobs. And just an incredible legacy.
That's fantastic. For the entertainment part of it, though, I'm waiting, very eagerly for the new release of the Lord of the Rings series that's coming out. I'm a big fan of fantasy and science fiction. There's so many wonderful stories coming out now. I can't keep up. I just can't. But there's so many wonderful writers right now. I'm a sucker for really good writing, for dialogue, for all those pieces, and that's how they get me.
Yeah. Speaking of fantasy sci-fi, have you read any of Brandon Sanderson's work?
Now, which series did he put out?
He finished The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Yes, so he finished that.
A colleague of mine recommended that, and I binge watched the entire series. I love it.
Yeah, so he didn't start the series. It was started by Robert Jordan. It's actually fascinating if you read the books. This has been my hobby the past couple of years as I read long series of fantasy sci-fi, because I just really enjoy the fact that you go book to book to book, and it's the same characters, the same storylines. You don't have to have that sort of grief when you put the characters away, if you and it's just such a great way to switch off. But it's an amazing story. I believe it. Yeah, it's the Wheel of Time, so it is the one that's on Prime. So Robert Jordan wrote this series, and yet he unfortunately was, I think it was, he was diagnosed with cancer and knew that he was going to pass away before he could finish it. And so he tasked his wife. He said, "I want you to find an amazing writer who can really complete this series." And because there were so many people who loved his writing, there were a lot of authors that they could have chosen. So his wife, after Robert Jordan had passed away, started actually looking around at who would be a great person to really finish off the legacy and finish this series well. And they decided on Brandon Sanderson. And yeah, so he actually, and he had read these books, it was like Robert Jordan was his hero. And so he then finished the series and actually wrote the final books, and they're fantastic. And just a fascinating story of legacy. But yeah, he's also written, I'm reading a series that he's written the whole thing called Mistborn right now. But for me, I love nonfiction. I love in-depth leadership books, but also I think we all need those outlets where you can just switch off and there's nothing like a great storyline and great characters.
Right. My colleague and I were talking about that briefly today, comparing the Wheel of Time and the J.R.R. Tolkien extensions that's coming out. We tied in J.K. Rowling stuff.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But both of us are big fans and follow those things and talk about different things, from the books to the series, the movies, the television. It's amazing. It really is.
Have you ever been to New Zealand, where they filmed a lot of Lord of the Rings?
Right. It's on my list. My father is gone, and I would love to go.
Okay, so when you go, my wife Liz and I went just before the pandemic, and because it's very close to us from where I am in Brisbane in Australia, it's a 3 hours away, New Zealand, so it's really close to our neighbour. One of the amazing things you can do that we did, and it was just so much fun, is you can actually go and do a tour of Hobbiton, the village that they even built in the Hobbit. They even built that what is it, like, sort of the pub that all the dwarves were were eating and drinking in the Hobbit. And if you love Lord of the Rings, highly recommend going. And it's a bit of a drive out of town, but walking around there is surreal. If you love Lord of the Rings, it's just mind blowing. You're walking around all of these, seeing all the little the way they built it, and they show you the tree, and there's a great story behind the tree that if you watch it again, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, there's this amazing story about this massive tree that's in Hobbiton. And what they had to do is, obviously in the Hobbit, it was meant to be before Lord of the Rings, so they actually had to find a way to build. I think they built their own smaller version of the tree, which you can see, and it's crazy that it's man-made, because they needed to make it look like it was an earlier version, so they actually had to build the second sort of tree. Wow. So the stories like that you get on the tour, for any Lord of the Rings fanatics, it's just incredible. And New Zealand, I always joke about getting a sponsorship from Tourism Australia, because I'm always raving about Australia, but New Zealand is just, you can see, if you watch Lord of the Rings and look at the landscape. Actually, I've found if you're looking at a beautiful landscape in a movie, there was one we watched the other day, I can't remember what it was. If it's in a beautiful, stunning landscape, then so often, if you check where it was filmed, it was New Zealand. It's like, whenever people need this breathtaking landscape, it's often filmed in New Zealand.
Wonderful.
Tourism New Zealand, I'm still waiting for my invitation for you to come on as a sponsor. I think I'd be a great advocate for Tourism New Zealand. But regardless, I'll keep giving them shout outs. Beautiful place. Well, Travis, great to have a good long chat about Lord of the Rings and New Zealand. And but more importantly, It's been great to chat with you about leadership. Is there, for those who want to find out a bit more about, the school district and the school you lead, and connect with you on, say, LinkedIn, what's the best way for people to find you online?
Well, online, LinkedIn, just the name Travis Moore is on there. I have that account. I do share quite a bit of leadership things in and outside of education. If you ever wanted to know more about the journey as our school, because our school is not a typical traditional high school. It's an alternative thing for students that don't really match that cookie cutter thing like you talked about. And we spent the last couple of years redesigning, redoing the things, and we're actually going through rebranding. So if anybody wanted to talk about any of those things, I'm available. My email addresses are attached to those accounts. And I love talking about education and leadership in general, and Lord of the Rings, and would love to learn more about New Zealand.
Yeah.
So any and all.
That's right. You have to go. It's so beautiful, particularly to see Hobbiton. Well, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Another great conversation. It's been so much fun today. Don't forget, I also have the Jonno White Leadership Podcast, where I give you tips on how to build a high-performance team and how to build a healthy workplace culture and things like that. And Leadership Question of the Day podcast, where I ask you a different question every day to put a stone in your shoe and really challenge you to grow as a leader. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to Travis for being so generous with your time, for just having such a great chat and filling us in a bit on your story, and also some really rich conversation about education that I think every leader, regardless of whether they're in the education industry, people need to be thinking about, because it's so, so important. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Jonno.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And you know, my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jonno White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.